are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. I hope everything is going well for you and you're preparing and you're studying hard and you are getting the results you deserve. If you're not improving and if you fail in the exam, then, or if you just want to pass first time, then get in contact at IELTSPodcast.com, and there you'll be able to find all the online courses and a ton of tutorials. And that's why I set up the site. And as you know, I used to be a tutor, a private tutor in Spain, and I wanted to get good at teaching IELTS. I wanted to become a professional. So I started interviewing all the experts. I started recording these interviews. That's how I launched IELTS Podcast about 10 years ago. We have been growing ever since. And that's why I could launch the online courses with the Jump to Band 7 or It's Free. And this summer, we are launching IELTSpodcast.com/live, where you'll be able to join us for online classes and even live trainings for most of the summer, just to make sure we can get you the results you deserve. So to help me today, we're going to be talking about listening skills, and we've got Robert Buckinghamshire. How are you doing, Robert?
Yeah, very well. And you, Ben, you okay?
All good, thank you.
Good.
All good.
That's nice.
Tell us again from which part of England you're from, because you definitely have a different accent to me, as all our listeners
Slightly different. I mean, but then you never heard my father speak, of course, who came way much north than you. He would have called you a southerner. He came from, well, and other things too, even worse than that. But because he
you called me a
from,
criminal in the previous episode, and now you're saying your dad would have abused me as well.
A southerner. He was from Sunderland, way up in the northeast. But I, for one reason or another, mainly because of what he did for a living, I was born way down in the southwest in Plymouth, which is, it's a naval. It wasn't a bad, to be honest with you. It was a nice kind of place to spend the first, let's say, 18 or 19 years of my life. Pleasant city, a little bit. Once you leave Plymouth and you go to other cities, a little bit on the slow side, a little provincial. People from the southwest, if anybody listening in, it's a great part of the country. It's mainly these days tourism and not much industry going on there. Plymouth is a city. It's quite a busy city. It's a port. It's very famous for its history connected to the Navy and stuff like that. It's a nice place to be, and not in my lifetime will I go back to live there, but if anybody goes to the UK, I would recommend visiting it. It's a pleasant enough part of the country. But of course, the southwest is completely different to the north and also to places like London. So the first time you move out of Plymouth and go to places like London, people listen to your accent and they think you're a bit weird. Although I never, because neither of my parents came from there. I never kind of acquired the real. I can imitate that accent. I can say, "Oh, how are you? All right."
Yeah, there's that song, isn't there? There's that song that I can't read, I can't write, I can't tell my left from right, but it don't really matter because I can drive my tractor. No, that's right.
What
my friend used to sing about the Southwest.
Exactly, and it's very interesting actually when you think of modern English, because of course the old south of England habit, which people have ignored because it's really associated with the countryside, of pronouncing that R sound at the end, like Peter, how are you, Peter? You got a new car? But if we listen to American English, that's exactly what they do. I mean, they took that sound of that R across the Atlantic with them when they all left the English shores or the shores of the British Isles about 400 years ago. They took that with them. Mix that with Irish English, and you've got American English.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
Totally.
in 80%, mix up a bit of, other influences too, of course, without
Yeah.
denying the melting pot that is the United States. But that's what you've got.
Absolutely, yeah. Just one last thing before we jump into today's tutorial. Also, when they left 400 years ago, they took with them the vocabulary at the time, which is why there's old words such as fall, which we don't use in England anymore. We ditched it and we used we went for the
autumn.
Yeah, we went for the most
the French, the sophisticated,
the French version,
Frenchy word, the French.
Yeah, for some reason we adopted the Frenchy version and went for autumn, and the Americans carried on using fall. And then when they came back, it's like, wow, you call it fall? That's weird, But it does make more sense because the leaves do fall. Yeah,
absolutely. That's
okay.
true. That's true.
Yeah, I won't go into the Australian accent. That's a whole new start, a whole new podcast. But anyway, today, well, in the last episode about IELTS listening, we were talking about anticipating and targeting. And today we're going to be also focusing on the IELTS test, but we're going to be looking more at section 3 and 4. So just before we move on, can you tell us a bit more about, just remind us, Rob, about anticipating and targeting, please?
Yeah, that's what we talked about last time, wasn't it? Anticipating and targeting. Anticipation, remember, involves all the knowledge we have of context, the general topic and its particularities, for example, the situation, as many people call it, and language, vocabulary associated with the topic, and grammar too. Will it be formal or less formal, for example? Everything that we as listeners bring to the act of listening. Obviously, through anticipating or knowing beforehand, we can largely make sense of spoken language. If not, we wouldn't really understand very much at all, I don't think. It's the same with everything, with speaking, with writing. It's in a sense, although every time we open our mouths, we're saying something original or we're writing something new. In fact, we're not. We're just using all that knowledge we had before to make the same phrases in slightly different contexts. We're not inventing anything very much. So through anticipating or knowing, we can make sense of things. And the other crucial element we talked about is our skill at picking out details or targeting certain elements, a number, a date, a name, that football result you're waiting for, and you turn on the radio to catch it. And you tell people to shut up, I'm listening to the football results. And you hear the noise, but you're waiting because they come in alphabetical order. You're waiting for the name of your team to come up. And there it comes. Yes, or no. And the emotional reaction afterwards. But because we're targeting, that's all. We're knowing what we're looking out for. So our ability to do all that, of course, depends on our language skills, but also on our knowledge of all kinds of different contexts. And in the IELTS exam, those two essential skills are being tested above all, I think, in the first of the 2 of the 4 sections. Most often through the kind of fill-in exercises, the fill in with one word and or a number of section 1. And also the variety of types of questions in section 2, like matching and multiple choice. Those are topics we could look at another time, the exact types of tests that we're going to get, the types of questions that are being asked and how best to answer them. As we move on to sections 3 or 4, however, those 2 skills are joined by others that come into play. Let's take a step back a moment. Academic IELTS in particular is academic. The test has that important element of judging if the test taker, that's all you out there listening, would easily fit into studying in an English-speaking environment. One vital skill you would need to match that kind of profile is the ability to participate in small group academic style discussions, seminars or workshops, or give them any kind of formal or not so formal name you want. Can you talk academic stuff to other academic people, to your students, to your professors, to your tutors, etc.? That's why section 3 is always a conversation between 2 to 4 people, maximum, in an educational context. Often something like, 2 students talking about a project or an assignment, maybe with a tutor. In such situations, the participants will ask different questions and have different information depending on their role. I mean, one useful way, I think, to improve our listening comprehension skills in this area is to think actively about the individuals taking part in any conversation and prepare for what they might say. I mean, who are they? What role are they playing? What is expected of them? So why do we call this kind of skill the thinking, or perhaps better, preparing skill?
Yeah, I remember this so vividly when I was learning Spanish.
Yeah.
And I would be in a group and I would be following the conversation. And then I'd be like, okay, I can finally follow this. This blob of sound has finally, my brain has finally learned how to separate it into sounds, into syntax, and I'm finally understanding it.
Yeah.
And okay, that's half of the problem solved. And now I want to participate, but it took me so long to formulate my sentence because I didn't want to make it, I didn't want to make a blunder. I wanted to be understood. And I finally formulated, I've got it together, and I want to say it, but the conversation's moved on. They left me, the bus left without me, and I'm still,
they were having a coffee by the time you
they graduated by the time
winding up the alarm clock and going to bed.
But it's so frustrating. And I think this is why the IELTS exam is probably one of the reasons why it's number one, because having to prepare this skill, having to develop this skill is a supreme preparation for academic or university, real life in your target country.
Yeah. I mean, if we look at, in fact, at the practice test, I mean, okay, we've got, let's say we're doing one, an IELTS practice test, section 3, listening. I mean, all right, I've got one here, and I see that there are 3 people involved, a tutor and 2 students. Okay, of course, I think to myself, the tutor is the one most likely to be asking certain types of questions. That's what they get paid for. That's what they do for a living, isn't it? And then they always come up with the answers. They ask the trick questions and the students can't answer them, then they give them the answers. Okay, I mean, in this kind of context, he's going to be asking, he or she, about progress or what your aims are, your research aims. I mean, for example, while the students may ask questions, I mean, seeking advice or trying to clear up doubts. Shall I study this, or do you think this is a good idea if I read that book, or what book should I read? Okay, so looking at the questions being asked, because that's what I'm looking at the moment, the questions they're asking. I'm not worrying about the listening to it yet, or the script that I have. Looking at the questions being asked a little more closely, I can work through each one, figuring out who is most likely to have the information that will give me the answer. I mean, of course, in each listening test, the scene, the scenario, the topic will vary. And please don't forget this, because, I mean, it can be a kind of a heavy distractor, I think. We must always remember that whether or not we are familiar with the topic is largely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's not the topic we're being asked questions on, it's the language. I mean, take this, for example. This is my example. It's from that same Cambridge thing I've mentioned before, IELTS 14, test 3. A tutor is asking 2 students. They've got names. The tutor has no name. It's just called the tutor. And the students are Rosie and Martin. And he's asking them about their project on, believe it or not, and please don't laugh, woolly mammoths. Now, for all of you out there who didn't have the privilege of, and I'm joking, of course, of a British education at primary school, you probably think, a woolly mammoth? What the hell is that? It's a kind of Bronze Age or Ice Age or creature who looked a bit like an elephant with a lot of hair and big tusks, you know, a woolly mammoth, a big animal with tusks and a big trunk, you know.
A typical IELTS listening topic.
Exactly. I mean, how are you doing with your woolly mammoths these days? Well, pretty well, thank you. Yes. I mean, yeah, so I'm doing my MBA in business studies. I'm also an expert on woolly mammoths, actually. Oh, really? So,
the real skills, the
real skills we need in this life. Yeah. So I'm sure they're fascinating, woolly mammoths, but there we are. The question asked is about as general as you can get. It's not even a question. In fact, I'm going to read this out in a minute, but the tutor just says to them, let's look at what you've got. Let's look at what you've got. He's asking about them. Their progress. I mean, what have they been up to? What have they been doing on this woolly mammoths topic? It's an invitation for the students to speak, to explain something. It's like when you go to a doctor and the doctor says, what brings you here? You don't say a bus. You say, well, doctor, I haven't been feeling very well recently. You know, it's my back or something. You know? So the first student who answers seems to be handing over some notes to the tutor because she says, this is Rosie, we've got a short outline here, which in turn prompts a question from the tutor for more detail because he says, oh, so it's about blah, 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 which gives the other student, Martin, the chance to open a discussion, a kind of doubt clearing session about the introduction to the project. Now, I'm talking backwards here because we don't know the actual conversation yet, but I'm going to be reading that in a second, yeah, with 3 different voices. Don't worry about a thing. Now, if we check the first question, this is the actual first question in section 3. And that gives us, the listeners, a kind of green light to concentrate carefully on what comes next. Here's the question. Question number 21. How will Rosie and Martin introduce their presentations? I'll say it again. How will Rosie and Martin introduce their presentations? And their presentation, sorry, singular. And we're giving 3 options. I didn't say, sorry, this is a ABC, multiple choice. Will they introduce their presentation, their written presentation, through a drawing, a timeline, or a video clip? That all sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? But remember, of course, I mean, as listeners, we've got this context now. We've given it some thought. We've thought about, you know, tutors, students discussing a project, giving advice, and so on and so forth. We've got the educational setting and the roles of the participants. We're also prepared. We know what to listen out for. We're listening out for this. This may seem a very similar idea to the idea of the targeted listening, isn't it? I mean, anticipating a number or a date, for example. Of course it is. It is similar, but I think it is a bit more complex this time in terms of information. I mean, so much of language that I've just said a few minutes ago is really a matter of finding the new amongst the routinely old. I mean, what is that new stuff I'm trying to find out? It's not just a number in this case, it's a little bit more than that. It's the new information we want to catch. And of course, we've also had the distractors. We've got those awful distractors. Let's go through it. Let's go through this.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, I've got it here. I've got it here in a better one because I mean I found that I've got online I've got a better. I can see this very well. I'll do all 3. Okay, don't worry about a thing. Okay. So I'll do the tutor sounds like this, and Rosie sounds like this, and Martin sounds like this. Okay, all right. So Rosie and Martin, let's look at what you've got for your presentation on woolly mammoths. So that's our first thing we hear. So he's, you know, setting the scene. We're obviously going to get into this, you know, what have they got? What have they got? What have they done so far? So Rosie says, okay, we've got a short outline here, and hands it to him because he says, thanks. So it's about a research project in North America? He asks the question. He can see the title perhaps, or just the first line. Martin says, and here we get into our series of distractors. Yes, but we thought we needed something general about woolly mammoths in our introduction to establish that they were related to our modern elephant and they lived thousands of years ago in the last ice age. Nothing so far, right? We don't know the answer to the question. We don't know how they're going to present it. Is it going to be a video clip? Is it going to be through a timeline? Or is it going to be through a drawing? We don't know yet. But then Rosie comes in and says, hey, maybe we could show a video clip of a cartoon about mammoths. Great idea, we're thinking to ourselves. But isn't that a distractor? Because then she says, oh, but that would be a bit childish. So she's putting forward an idea and then taking it away again. And then she said, oh, could we have a diagram? It could be a timeline to show when they lived with illustrations. Interesting. So, hey, wait a minute, that seems to draw me to the answer of timeline, but also illustrations. Aren't illustrations drawings? Help me here, because Martin comes in and says, or we could just show a drawing of them walking in the ice. Hey, wait a minute, which is it going to be, a drawing or a timeline? But then he repeats more or less what Rosie said before. He corrects it, says, no, that's not such a great idea. Now, let's go with your last suggestion. And the tutor says, good. Then you're describing the discovery of a mammoth tooth on St. Paul's Island in Alaska. So blah, 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 blah. And it continues to the next questions and so on. So see how it flows there. If I read it all as one thing quite quickly, we've got those few seconds to think, all right, we got the distractor. Where am I going with this? Yes, it's the timeline is the answer. It's not a drawing. It's not the illustration by itself. And neither is it, of course, the video clip, although they both put forward those ideas and discarded them. Yeah. So Rosie and Martin, let's look at what you got. All right, sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that out of those distractors, most of them started with like, I could be this, I could be that. And they're all like kind of like, in fact, if I look at it now, all four of them were coulds, which is kind of like, what is going on here? Are they all just putting up suggestions? But then you only get the confirmation with the last one, and the confirmation isn't even an explicit confirmation. It's just saying, yeah, I'm going to confirm what you said and your last suggestion.
Let's go.
It's incredibly challenging, I would imagine, if you unless you're trained and unless you listen to our podcast first, which is true.
But of course, I mean, at the same time, I mean, that kind of could is the kind of language we might expect from students talking to their tutors, because obviously these are young students perhaps talking to a much more experienced person in the area, and you know they are hesitant. They are not showing that their ability to make their own decisions. They're still going through that phase of learning. So they're going to be very formal, you know. Well, what we could do, what do you think if we, you know, it's going to be a slightly more formal language, whereas the tutor, he's a bit more direct. So, you know, okay, let's look what you got. Okay, so it's about this, is it? Okay, great. So you're describing discovery. Okay, great. Okay, go ahead. Great.
That's an excellent, that's an excellent point, Rob, because I remember when in university it was that kind of language, and a lot of people in the group were reluctant to sort of like say, okay, I want to do this, I want this, and it has to be at this time. It was all sort of like suggestions and sort of like not group think, but kind of like putting suggestions forward politely and then choosing one. And, you know, I think we should do this. It wasn't like I want to do this. So yeah, that's an excellent point. And as we can see as well, it's reflected in the context, and it is quite an accurate academic discussion between students and the tutor.
Exactly. Yes. They used to have courses on that. I mean, I think I even gave a course on that once called Seminar Skills. Wow. Very fancy, doesn't it? You know, how do you? You know, it always remind me when I did some kind of studies in the last days I did in England, like a postgraduate stuff, and one of my fellow students was from Iraq, lovely man, and the professor came in, or the tutor came in to one seminar and said, okay, my name is Professor Spicer, but everybody calls me Sam. please call me Sam. Okay, this was quite an old guy, quite a well-known guy in his field who sadly died many years ago, but he was a pretty good guy actually in his time and place. And during the seminar, my friend from Iraq kept addressing him in this way. But excuse me, Professor Spicer, and Professor Spicer kept saying, please call me Sam. He hated being called professor. It was like kind of the reverse of the roles. You know, please, I don't like all that professor stuff. I like informality. So.
Yeah, but I've seen those videos online where students start calling their teachers by their first name, and
Right.
you know, walking through school, and it's like, "Hello there, Matt," and like, "What did you call me, boy?"
Yeah.
It's yeah, but I can totally understand as well if you're from a country which respects a lot of the formality. It could be equally challenging calling them by their first name. Yeah,
it was impossible for this guy. He couldn't do it. We kept saying, what was he called, this guy? Laith, just say his name. I was like, you like to be called Sam, call him Sam. I can't do that. He's the professor.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very funny. Okay, so so we've got this idea of preparing stuff. I mean, let's move on a second to section 4, which is that's our academic style talk or lecture, isn't it? It's always a monologue, just one person speaking. All these skills we've been looking at, anticipating, targeting, preparing, they all come together in one, really, in the last part. It's horrible, isn't it? In all tests, why do they put the most difficult part last? Why don't we get rid of the most difficult bit first and do the easy bit later? No, we can't, because, you know, this is the end of the speaking test, of the listening test. And a lot of test takers by this time, they're not only feeling nervous and tense, they're probably getting a bit tired of all this. It's a bit frantic, isn't it? It's a bit heavy. So, but I'm sorry about that, but we've got to keep going and concentrate just the same, or even more so in the last part as we did at the beginning of the test. So we know, of course, that the topic requires no specialist knowledge. Don't worry, you don't have to learn anything about woolly mammoths. Don't worry about those. They'll take care of themselves. They're all dead anyway, so don't worry about them. But there'll be a lot of information to take in. We've got to really receive a lot of information. And it's a case, again, of picking up what we've got to do. It's vitally important, I think, that we are skilled at picking out as many clues as we listen to the direction and flow of the talk. I mean, these clues are irrespective of the content. They got nothing to do with the content. They're just universal clues we would get in any kind of talk or in any kind of conversation or written English as well. These are the signposts, if you like. I mean, they are our old friends we've seen in other parts of IELTS exams, the cohesive devices, that ridiculous expression, no, linking words, which tell us, for example, if the speaker is changing topic, negating or denying something, or adding information. I mean, for example, if we want to change topic, I've been talking about woolly mammoths, but I want to talk about the saber-toothed tiger. Okay, let's go on to the saber-toothed tiger now. Now, the saber-toothed tiger, as opposed to the woolly mammoth, etc., etc., etc. Or, of course, negating or denying something. On the other hand, of course, the tiger, as compared to the woolly mammoth, was very different. He was a vegetarian, or perhaps, we hope. Adding information. I want to add even more information. Well, of course, the woolly mammoth was an interesting creature who lived in the Ice Age. And what is more is the fact that the woolly mammoth survived longer than the dinosaurs, or whatever we're going to say. Okay, so I'm good at making things up. I know nothing. I know nothing about the woolly mammoth. Okay, being able to notice these signposts, knowing exactly what functions they perform, is an essential comprehension skill. I mean, what do we call this? Should we call it noticing? Or would you prefer signposting? I don't know, noticing, signposting, picking out these clues, knowing that when somebody says, on the other hand, or what is more is, another point I'd like to make is that what comes next is worth listening to.
Excellent point.
Or even when we're reading or even writing, that big word, however, we know that what comes after however, probably, according to somebody at least, is worth reading or listening to. If not, they wouldn't use the word however. I mean, listen to this. I mean, it comes from that same thing. It's from the section 4, Cambridge IELTS test 2. Let me check out this. All right, let me check out this bit. Okay, this is all about a series of a talk, a lecture on predicting the weather forecasting. Now, shall I do this first? Let me think. Shall I read it out first? Let me see. Okay, all right. Let's go to the first question. Actually, let's think of the first question. It's a gap filling exercise. It's one of those exercises that are common in section 4. We have a summary of the text and we have to fill in the gaps using no more than, I can't remember if it was no more than 1 word or 3 words. I honestly don't remember. I think it was just 1 word only. The first question is pretty simple, actually. It says, in our text, it says, many cultures invented bing, 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 and other ceremonies to make the weather gods friendly. I have to say that a couple of times. Many cultures invented something. I know it's going to be a noun, it's the name of something. Many cultures invented something and other ceremonies, so it's a type of ceremony, to make the weather gods friendly. I mean, before I listen, I'm thinking, weather gods? What is this all about? I look over my summary, and it seems to be about ancient traditions of the weather and how people predicted the weather for many thousands of years, and before it became, as we know today, a fairly apparently scientific study. Sometimes people don't agree with that because they have no idea what they're talking about. It's going to rain tomorrow and it's sunny or something like that. But we've got, if we listen to it, I mean, look at the number of clues or signs that we have there leading up to the information we're listening out for. Okay, let me read it and try to follow it with me, and we'll read it a couple of times and think of where these clues are. Okay, so part 4 is starting. We've had a chance to look at the answer sheet. What we've got to fill in is fill in the summary, and we've got the title of it, and we've got a text of 2 or 3 paragraphs with lots of spaces, 10 spaces, of course, and it's 1 word for each space. As always, the first part of the text or the listening that we're going to hear, there are no questions. It's going to come around about after 3 or 4 sentences or a few 20 seconds, 30 seconds in. So we've got a chance to get into the topic and get a feel of it before they start asking questions. But on the other hand, from the beginning, we've got this kind of outline that the talker gives that shows us where he or she is going. All right, so here we go. Section 4. In this series of lectures about the history of weather forecasting, I'll start by examining its early history. That will be the subject of today's talk. Okay, so we'll start by going back thousands of years. Most ancient cultures had weather gods, and weather catastrophes, such as floods, played an important role in many creation myths. Generally, weather was attributed to the whims of the gods, as the wide range of weather gods in various cultures shows. For instance, there's the Egyptian god, sun god Ra, and Thor, the Norse god of thunder and lightning. Many ancient civilizations developed rites such as dances in order to make the weather gods look kindly on them. But the weather god was of daily importance, blah, blah, blah. I've said enough because I've given you the answer there. The question asked us about, what was it? Let's go back to that question. The question asked whether
it said many cultures invented something
and other ceremonies. And of course, the answer, look at the clues we've got. I mean, the way it flows, I'm giving too many clues. We're listening out for this. We got the idea from the beginning. It's a series of talks. In this series of lectures, Is this number one, number two? I don't know. Perhaps it's number one because it talks about early history. No, perhaps this is the beginning of the whole series of lectures. I'll start. So this is the beginning. So that's the subject we're talking about. Today's talk. I'll start by examining the early history. That will be the subject of today's talk. I'm clear. I got the idea. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And then we'll get going back into the details. Okay, so we'll start by going back thousands of years. And then we've got a series of examples illustrating. We've got a such as, we've got a for instance, we've got another such as. He or she says, most ancient cultures had weather gods, and weather catastrophes such as floods played an important role in many creation myths. Generally, weather was attributed to the whims of the gods, as the wide range of weather gods in various cultures shows. For instance, for example, there's the Egyptian god, sun god Ra, and Thor, the Norse god of thunder and lightning. Many ancient civilizations developed the rites, such as dances. I underline it and I shout it out again, dances, in order to make the weather gods look kindly on them. Of course, we've got the other stuff here, haven't we? Stuff we haven't really mentioned today. Above and beyond all that stuff, you know, the paraphrasing, what do we call, a rite, R-I-T-E. Okay, if we study anthropology, it's going to be a very familiar word for us, R-I-T-E. It's a kind of ceremonial thing. It's a ceremony, isn't it? It's a synonym, if you like, of ceremonies. In this case, of course, it goes into our question, other ceremonies. Yeah? And also, of course, to make the weather gods friendly, to look kindly on them. Yeah, the language in the talk is more sophisticated.
Yeah, and I think that shows like these listening skills are just so essential. I mean, not only to excel in the exam, but also to just to survive in an English speaking world, and obviously to get into university and to survive in university. So I think it's important, as Rob was saying, it's like to be aware of what is being tested so that we know like how good we are and what skills we need to work on and what skills are going to get us a high band score. Oh, would you agree there, Rob?
Absolutely. Because I mean, without listening, we are nothing. I mean, unless we can really catch what people say, as you said before, from your experience, and mine too, of course, from all our experiences, that, you know, being able to comprehend, being able to know where our talk is going, being able to be ready to take part ourselves, even if we don't feel that confident of our speaking skills at any given point. It's very much the essential first important step towards academic success. And using these skills in English, being aware, as you said, of what they're asking us. Always remember, it's nothing to do with the topic. The topic is, you know, just a general kind of thing which shouldn't really upset anybody. Don't be put off by the woolly mammoths or whatever it's going to be. I mean, we're just putting our skills into practice, you know, picking up those things, picking up those little clues. And it goes an awfully long way to getting that really high band score in listening. I think everybody should be aiming for, I mean, I'm going to say an 8 in listening. Aim for an 8. Forget the 7s. You can do it. It's there. I mean, because when you look back at the things that you made mistakes on when you're doing your practices, I mean, often you're going to, I don't know, pinch yourself, think, God, I'm stupid. Like, why has I got that wrong? I mean, just look at it. A lot of it looks so obvious. I mean, the questions are not that difficult once we get into the feel of what is going on and what is being tested. Once we know that, once we crack the format and the types of things they're looking out for, I think the details are pretty clear. They're not trying, although I will admit, and I'm going to try and find it for Ben's sake. I was listening to a listing the other day from IELTS 16. I loved it because it's somebody giving a description in section 2. And this girl or this lady has a wonderful North of England accent. I mean,
that sounds like a rough test.
So it's the vowels, it's the vowel sounds, but instead of but. Bass instead of bath.
It's so true. And like once you get good at these skills, I think, well, just going back to what Rob said, going for an 8 is definitely a smart idea. You're going to be overconfident, especially using these IELTS Cambridge books, which are rumored to be more difficult than the test. If you're regularly scoring around an 8, then you can go in knowing that your money is safe, that you're not gambling it on like wishing and hoping for that band 7. If you're regularly scoring around an 8, then you can confidently go and purchase that book that exam date. And also, if you with regards to the other subjects, the writing, the speaking, if you're struggling with those and you want to get the band 7, 8, or 9, then get in contact. We can help you. And this summer, we are launching a ton of live courses and live tutoring just to help these students pass. We've got a massive backlog of students who want to get the IELTS, want to get to Canada, the UK. You know, it's all opening. It's all exploding now. Thankfully, because in most countries, COVID is behind us. So we're getting back to it, and come and join us at IELTSPodcast.com/live. And thank you very much for listening. And thank you for joining us, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Good fun. Yeah. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.